Hi, and welcome back to It Takes a Village. I am Jenny Schultz-Thomas, and I am joined by my colleague and friend, Sarah Rental-Jones. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
I know, we haven't seen Sarah in a few weeks, so it's great to have you back. We have been going through this series of thinking about belonging and community, but talking with leaders from both countryside and then across the community. Here on It Takes a Village, we talk a lot about community and what it means to create communities of belonging, where each person finds a way in and knows that you're home. So, what does it mean to be at home when you're both part of a community and a leader in a community? As ministers, there's sort of a special nuance around finding your place within a called congregation, both as a leader and a worshiper, a friend, sojourning on the way. So, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Sarah, thinking about ministry, but also thinking about how we're talking about belonging and how being in leadership sometimes when the world's on fire, it's really difficult to know the way forward, right? How do we create spaces where everyone feels at home here in this community? So there's a lot to talk about, and I want to go all the way back to the beginning, if you don't care.
No.
Maybe not like your birth story. That's for another podcast, which is also super exciting. But no, talk to us and just kind of tell your story about call. Like, when did you feel... I know your dad's a pastor. Was that sort of part of that, or did you feel called to ministry as a child, or just tell us more about that? It's exciting to hear call stories.
Sure. Yeah. My earliest recollection of engaging in the church and feeling connected there was when my dad would take me with him to do supply preaching opportunities. His story was always he was a United Methodist pastor. And because they itinerate, and place people in different settings every 3 years often, he refused to do that. So he was sort of persona non grata to the district that he was in terms of being able to have a full-time ministry position. But he did a lot of pastoral supply. And so I would go along with him on Sunday mornings, and he would be the guest preacher. And he would also often do a lot of visitation while like a pastor was on vacation. He would go visit parishioners in the hospital, or if someone passed away, he might even officiate a funeral. But he often would take me along to visits too. So I got really positive memories of being with him and being in people's homes, and they would give me snacks, and it'd be really special. Or of course, when you're the guest preacher, often it's the highlights, right? You get to get good feedback, and people welcome you and are happy you're there, and so it was all this positive kind of reinforcement about church and ministry. And then when I was in about middle school, he got hired at a church to be a pastoral care coordinator kind of person. Wow. And he did similar things, visiting people, and then he would preach like once a month. So once he was there, that was a UCC church, and that was where we kind of made this change from United Methodist to UCC. And still all that time, like I wasn't always thrilled to have a pastor as a father, because it felt like people expected me to be like a goody-goody, or it was sort of like, oh, don't say that in front of Sarah, her dad's a pastor. And so I think that I, for a while, kind of resisted feeling like called to ministry and thought, oh, we'll do something else. But I never had like another clear idea of what I would do.
Okay.
And when I went to college, I remember my first major was humanities, which I should have just stayed with, because I ended up as an English lit major.
Oh, okay, right.
And so I was very close. And in the meantime, I was a psych major for about a year. That was way more science than I wanted. And then I was a Spanish major for a little while. I ended up with a Spanish minor. But I then found later this booklet, because I was in this, to me, kind of silly like pageant, but it was this sort of, it was meant to be for academic achievement, is how you were selected to be in. It was all girls. And we did have to dance around in like these gold lame costumes.
Oh
so
my gosh.
There's definitely
some pictures, Sarah.
Oh my gosh. I don't think there are any pictures of that.
Right.
But I remember looking in that program for that later, and it said that my career goal was to be a pastor. And I was 16 then.
Wow.
So I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
But it just kind of unfolded for me over time. I think there's so much about ministry that I really love doing, from the creativity involved in worship planning and preaching, to engaging people in conversation, having really meaningful conversations, supporting people when they're going through tough times. The justice work and prophetic work that we're invited into may or may not do well for me, but it's an opportunity at least. And so I ended up going to seminary just a year after college. I worked for 1 year. I did like a recruiting job, and then my grandmother passed away, and in 2003, and I was like, life is too short. I don't want to be in this job that I'm really not happy doing. And it feels like the next right step for me is ministry. And so I went to seminary and started to basically, from my second year of a 3-year seminary program, have worked in churches ever since, and with the exception of hospital chaplaincy.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, you think about a child being kind of formed on their father's coattails, right?
Yeah.
Which is, think of MLK's kids, or, any child who speaks about their parent, especially a deceased parent, a beloved parent who really modeled for them something that were maybe the unspoken sort of goals. You were being formed in ways that now, talking about your father, you are very similar to your father's ministry. And I don't know your father, but I know you pretty well. And just the way you describe for listeners today is very similar to your own disposition, the way that you love showing up for people, and you take on so many different things in the ministry, right? But the pastoral care piece, so much of life is witnessing, right? And then a parent relationship is also, you're embodying what they're teaching you just by going, and then you're being reinforced from the community at large that this is a place for you, right? Getting those snacks, being loved on and welcomed in. I mean, it really is the radical hospitality of the gospel, right? And so you can pageant yourself to resist it, right?
Yeah.
But then, it's sort of ever in there, spirit, right? Calling you to something. So that's amazing. Were there any moments, because of the early sort of itinerant relationship to church, was that sort of, say more about your dad, going to different churches. So was your family a member of a particular church and then your dad would just go, or were you all sort of following your dad in his different positions in ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because he didn't actually itinerate full time, we were members I guess I wasn't a member yet, but I was a child at a United Methodist congregation where my grandparents were. So my grandma Irene, after whom Irene is named, and my dad's dad were active members at this United Methodist church in Mount Wolf, Pennsylvania. And so we would go there anytime that I wasn't going with my dad.
Okay.
And my parents sang on the choir. And for a while, my mom directed the children's choir, which I was sort of like, why are you doing this? Please bring another director to me who's not my mother.
Oh,
no,
wow.
she was great. She was great. But it was just like, it used to be an activity to do with someone else.
Yes,
And then,
right.
a little too close to home. But we were really active there, and it was in a way kind of a loss of community to change then to go to the UCC church, because the United Methodist Church was maybe like 5 minutes from our house.
Yeah.
And my dad, part of, I think, the refusal to itinerate for him, part of it was a mismatch with what he felt called to do. He had gone to Union Theological Seminary in Manhattan and worked with different projects in Harlem, and was really drawn to urban ministry. And then he was apparently, according to him, his story was always that, he met with the DS or district superintendent or bishop or whomever was making that decision of where to send him, and they wanted to send him to Appalachia.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, this is not where I want to go. And so he felt like there was a disconnect there, and he lived on a farm that he had inherited from my grandparents. And that was just part of this farm family that had these farms in the town. And he didn't want to move off the farm. And my mom still lives there to this day.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
That was always something, even growing up, I didn't realize you could move for ministry. I just thought like you you become a pastor and then you serve in your hometown.
Yeah.
So then when I started to know that colleagues were moving for calls and going to conferences that were away. I mean, I think my dad didn't really like to travel.
Yeah.
So that was
Sounds
part
like
of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I learned that, I was like, oh, well, I don't really want to just stay here. And so that was, we moved in 2014, moved away from home and have lived different places since.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, I think I'm hearing you and I'm thinking about like a theology of place, and placemaking, and how like your dad, some people have this deep sense both of call and place, right? He had this, I am called to inner city, urban, and I know that's where, spirit is moving me, right? And then also a deep center in a place like the farm, right? So I could see sort of, and at that time and in Methodism, there's so many challenges, right? To feeling like you can actually thrive in ministry. It's already hard enough in going against the grain, for someone to say, a young man, I'm going to go to seminary, I'm going to be a minister, I'm going to and then not to really be able to engage and follow your passion, right? But I love that he was sort of this early resistor, right? He still, has his family and this great community that he loves, and he's still able to do ministry. Well, that's incredible. And thinking about your own call from there, how so much of that has shaped you in some ways, I'm sure, our parents do. So when you did, move and decide, this, I'm UCC, I feel called, how has that call journey changed for you? I mean, call is one of those, I grew up Baptist, and call is like, for me, it was this, I'm this old and I felt the spirit of, but it also has tentacles in we shape our call, right? It changes. There's no sort of divine you will be called to congregational care at Countryside, right? I mean, it's just an interesting thing that we talk about in a mystical way in some ways. But how is your call, kind of shaped over time, that led you here? I mean, talk about that journey.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure that it always feels like it has been cohesive because I remember opening my profile like we do in the UCC in 2014 and, looking at opportunities geographically, where would I go? And I should say, like, when I was called to the church I served in Pennsylvania, which ended up being like 45 minutes away from the farm, the same farm, and we lived in a neighboring town just about like 5 minutes away from my parents. And that particular call, I really did feel called to the church where I ended up serving, but I had been interviewing with churches in Vermont and New Jersey. I think those are the two main ones where I didn't really get to complete the interview process to come to like a decision. I was offered the call at this church in Pennsylvania and kind of had to think like, oh, I can't put them off for too long. I don't want them to think that I don't feel called there. I think what I was really wrestling with was staying home, like kind of that staying home kind of feeling. And so did that for 5 years and was really grateful because that was, Maggie was born when we were at that church. And then my dad actually covered my maternity leave for me.
Oh, that's great.
Which was really cool.
Yeah.
And then it was really serendipitous because then he passed away. I mean, Maggie was, I think, like 8 months old when he died. Wow. So the congregation really had known him. And then they were very supportive of me through my grief. Yeah. But then, after some time passed, I really felt restless again of, I don't only want to live in the same place I grew up for my whole life. And that was part, I think, of a call and that sense of restlessness. And so when I opened my profile, it was like, at the time I had a very more like touristy view of Hawaii. And I was like, oh, Hawaii has UCC churches. You have to check that box. Go consider Hawaii. And then, never really thinking that something would work out. Yeah. Because living on the East Coast, like we didn't even consider Hawaii as like a vacation place. Yeah. It takes so long to get there. It's like if you're going somewhere tropical, right? Going in the Caribbean, yep. Right? So that started all to come together, and then being called there and really learning more about the culture and the racial dynamics and just the history of the missionaries and all of the ways in which there's been this complicated relationship with Christianity and the islands and all of that, very different view then from just being a tourist. Yeah. And then, being able to live there for a total of like almost 7 years on 2 different islands, I think the thread there always felt like learning. I think that's been something maybe that has connected me, is like, is there more to learn here in this place, or maybe being called somewhere else to learn more things, and to grow and to stretch. And so the call to come to Omaha, really was to judicatory ministry. And honestly, like, I am still learning more about Omaha and really glad to be here. I feel like I still am not, I've not ever lived anywhere, maybe even in Pennsylvania, where I felt like this is my home, to have that depth of connection the way my dad did.
Yeah, for sure.
Honestly, the only place I ever really felt that was when I went to Ghana, which is so interesting because, and people will say that in Africa is kind of like the birthplace of humanity. And maybe that was the connection there. But I feel like call has usually been like, how can I serve? Where can I use my gifts? How can I show up? And where can I keep learning? And what is God leading me to? And sometimes it's really subtle. It's, and it comes with a lot of wrestling usually for me, because sometimes it's also more obvious than I want it to be. And certainly moving to Hawaii was no small thing.
Yeah.
It was a really hard move. I would not do that again. But yeah, I think just kind of like I always use the expression of following the breadcrumbs. It's like where, not Hansel and Gretel, it's like, following the breadcrumbs, to what the next step is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, two things you just said there. Like, one, what else is there to learn here? I mean, call, if you think about scripture and the way that call is manifest in so many different ways, one of the earliest and one of the ones that people know, right, is, God calling out, Samuel. It's like, oh, here I am, right? Here I am. Who is it? Did you call me? Who is it? Did you call me? Who is it? And then God, like, here I am, calling your name. Well, that's rarely what we experience in life.
Right.
A lot of people, you might say that or have a feeling or something, but it's rare that everyone walks around with like, yes, I heard this, God calling me and sent me to this place, or it's more of a Jonah thing. I think I might be, I don't want to be called there. What are you talking about? Hawaii again? I'd rather be in the belly of a whale. What are you talking about? I don't hear anything. So call, we are introduced to the idea of call rarely, right, in life. I mean, sometimes call really means vocation, right, in the way that we talk about it with our kids or, just in society. It's, what are you going to be when you grow up? Really, maybe not, what is there to learn, and where is my spirit yearning to learn that? Where am I, right? What am I being called to learn? And so I love that you talked about that in Hawaii, because it was a really difficult experience in some ways for you, even though wonderful land, right? Two sides of the same coin.
Right.
But when you have this is hard and it's great, and you ask, well, what is there to learn? And it's sort of like I was talking with Dan Loven-Crum in his interview weeks ago, and being here for years and years, right, and serving here at Countryside through lots of changes. And his response, was when I asked him about, well, why didn't you go at that time, or did you feel called? And he said, I'm always asking Spirit, God, is there something else for me to do here? Is there still work to be done? And of course, I reassured him that there is a lot of work to be done, Dan. But your question, right, what is there to learn? I think that's a really helpful one for all of us to think about, at this time when life and things are really going not the way that we would like in our society, in our culture, in our nation. And for most people, in our listeners, those who are a part of our community, right, we're really gut-wrenching over what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty. And a question that's always life-giving, right? When vocation is, Parker Palmer, let your life speak, like in a moment in time, that call is to be present with today, yourself. And so what is there to learn right now that helps me make it through this day and the next day, right? The call to live, the call to be present in right where you are, right? The uncertainty around you is scary and you don't know where we're going, but we are here right now, right?
Yeah.
So your call story, I think, has a lot to, and you being in this place, right, in Countryside, in Omaha, learning more about this home that we both share, it's newer. But what do we have to learn right now? I mean, that might be something for our entire community. How can we ask that when grief, when stress, when worry, right? Maybe call is being present to yourself in the midst of uncertainty. You know, maybe it's not vocational ministerial call, but maybe ministering to your soul.
Yeah.
Letting Spirit minister to you. So that, and then you said following the breadcrumbs, which, you know, has me thinking about Jesus, you know, another story when, you know, he's talking about the dogs under the table and eating the scraps. And when I heard you say that, it felt sort of like following the breadcrumbs is I'm hungry. And so I'm following those breadcrumbs because it's the next step. But so often too in ministry, it can feel sort of like you are on the outside serving a community, right? I'll never forget this. One of my mentors and close teacher friends, right, who I served with for a long time, a clergy couple, Rick and Jill Edens. Jill, you know, my supervisor for a long time and support, she said to me, you know, because they served in New England for a long time and much more, you know, close to colonized. But she said to me, here, it feels like we're the help, right? And so in some ways, ministry in any kind of service, I was talking to a woman this morning who has a CNA who they try to support, but it can feel like you're an outsider being called to the inside. Even with churches, it's a job you're being paid for. You have the spiritual call, but then you also have the work that's in front of you. And for ministers, usually it's all the same, right? It's your whole life, it's your call, it's your love, it's your passion. But the following the breadcrumbs just reminded me of that. Sometimes following the next journey to learn can also feel like well, how do I become part of that community? And not even like the itinerant kind of thing is, well, you're always on the outside, and just when you get your toe in, you know, you're being sent. So that whole system isn't really meant for a lot of community dynamics with the minister and the congregation, which sort of goes against, for me, like who you are, like very much like in it with you. This is your community. So you probably didn't mean that with the breadcrumbs, but that's what it brought to my mind. It was this balance that ministers do have to kind of dance. Like you want to be a part of the community, but you're also called to shepherd and to be set apart so that you can serve. How, you know, I don't know if that resonates at all, but how do you see that whole experience of being a minister and part of a community and the balance?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tricky thing to navigate at times because, you know, there's times where you're really welcomed in because you're the minister in the community, you know, and maybe families invite you to their home after the baby's baptism or something, you know, and you go to the luncheon in their house. And other times it's like, thank you for what you did to officiate, and now we are all going to go, you know, hang out together. And so I think, I mean, for me, I've really sought solace in my family, like my family of 5 now. And I think that moving away from our family in Pennsylvania, especially when we lived in Hawaii, you know, it just really solidified our family unit. And we also learned to make community with whomever we were around and both welcome others in and be welcomed in. I've kind of always, you know, I don't know. Sometimes it makes me sad. Sometimes I think it's a positive that I kind of hold on loosely to different levels of community, just knowing that, you know, there is sometimes that role of, oh, you're a minister. It's like kind of reminds me when I was a kid. I was like, oh, don't say that in front of her. She's a minister.
Right.
You know, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen that graphic. It's like a pie chart of like things what people will say to you after they find out you're a minister. And it's like the hugest part of the pie chart, like 95%. And then there's like these other little slivers, but the 95% is like they're going to apologize for swearing. In front of
totally.
You, right. It's like, and you're like, gosh. It's okay. It's okay.
Yes. Okay. My head will not spin around.
Right.
And I will not do it.
Right. Yeah. Like, wait till we talk for a
I know. Yeah. Just wait a minute.
You might be like, what? But, you know, just kind of like having that distance. I feel like it's just maybe an occupational hazard at times. And it's something that also, you know, you can learn to be vulnerable with the people you serve because at times you have to, you know, and I think that maybe being in the congregation when my father passed away taught me that. And he had been vulnerable I always remember a sermon he preached when he was diagnosed with lymphoma. And he wove that into a sermon to share with the congregation where he was an associate pastor. and allowed people to care for him through that. So it's sort of like a dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you saw how I asked you that question.
Yes.
I wasn't the one answering that question. That's a great thing about sitting this chair. Yeah, it is a dance, as we think about ministry and just kind of where we are in the world, but your own place, right? I love that whole theology of place. I think it has so much power in, you're talking about Mother Earth, the soil, the climate change. I mean, there's so much about the place that we're in that I think we can learn a lot from observing the natural world, right? It's the emergent strategy for birds. I mean, there's so much there. But I would love for you to share sort of, because we're in this place together, at Countryside, what are your favorite things about ministry right now? Like what excites you? Which, it feels hard sometimes when the world is on fire. But what do you love about your work that you're doing here at Countryside, or as a human being, right? Your hobbies. I know you love to knit. Like, what gives you energy and joy?
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing people's stories, and I guess that goes along with learning. It's so easy to look at a person and just make a lot of assumptions based on appearance or, how they're showing up in a setting, but to really get to hear, where did you grow up? What did you do as a child? What were your parents like? What was your family like? I love to hear what is going on with people and what memories they have. And I think, you probably have this experience when you give a sermon and people will then share with you like what that brought up for them. And maybe it triggered a memory for them, or it drew them to an action that they're going to take in their life right now. Just kind of hearing like what is really happening with people. I think that is always life-giving for me. And I think, hearing how the questions, like I'm enjoying teaching confirmation right now. I was just telling someone the other day, we have just such a talkative group that we really, the hour just flies by, and they have a lot of good questions. They have a lot of good insights, and encouraging those questions, right? Because while we have our tradition and we have, our curriculum is grounded in the United Church of Christ, but they'll often bring things up and I will say, scholars are debating that. Like we talked last Sunday about the Trinity. Like, oh my gosh, there's people who that's their whole field of scholarship, right? Is talking about the Trinity, and they're still trying to make it make sense.
Yes.
So it's okay that we have a lot of questions.
Right.
I think that I don't often consider myself a teacher, but I do feel like I was just telling someone this morning, like I'm not a teacher for how to do something. Like I would be the kind of teacher that you come to and talk about what you read, but I cannot teach you to read. I don't know how to explain that, this like real nuts and bolts stuff, but more of like theoretical, let's read something together and then discuss it. So I guess maybe sometimes I am a teacher in that regard, but it's more like a facilitator of discussion and, new learnings within that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, I think some of the best teachers I've ever had are the ones that help me ask questions, not the ones who tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure you are an amazing teacher, and those students will be, so much better off without having someone say, oh yeah, underline this, memorize that.
Right.
I think I had to memorize like half the Bible when I was growing up, and then present your Bible, the Bible drill, so you don't learn in that way. I love that you've shared that. I think we're all in this place of being confirmed over and over and over, right, in our faith. If we ever just decide, here we are on the dotted line, boom, there's more to learn and there's more to unlearn that we might continue, right, to evolve as humans, as people of faith. So it's been awesome to talk with you. I know that folks already know Sarah, but just always knowing a little bit more. And if you are around, please reach out to Sarah. She loves to hear stories, and that means yours. So do I. We have so much to learn about our home, about Countryside, about each other. But again, ministry isn't just about the vocation and being clergy. Ministering is what we do when we show up together to build a community of belonging. So you are all ministers with us here at Countryside, and we're so thankful for your presence. We'll see you next time.